Welcome to ShiftWatch. I'm your host, Starbuck. In this episode, humans are splitting into different dimensions. This video explores the timeline split that's currently happening to human consciousness. One stream of consciousness is on a descending timeline and will remain in the third dimension. The other stream of consciousness is ascending into the fifth dimension. Eventually, these two timelines will completely separate like a cell splitting through mitosis. The driving forces behind these streams of consciousness are fear and love. The Alchemist beautifully explains how these two paths will present themselves and how we can embark on the ascending path. Next, connecting the dots between the current elevating solar storms and seismic activity throughout the Earth. Here are two different accounts of seeing solar storms resulting in the seismic activities in historically likely and unlikely places right now. And then, this content got my attention a few years ago, illustrating interest in finding Shambhalla by both the metaphysically minded and the US government back in the 1920s and 30s. This is a snippet from Nicholas and Helena Roeric's expeditions to find Shambhalla in Inner Earth. Follow the link in the description for the entire video.
Because the more that a being raises their frequency and becomes more conscious, they are raising their vibration into love. And love reflects to us through the act of freedom. So freedom, consciousness, and love are all different forms of the same expression. Whereas when it comes to the degenerative timeline or the descending timeline, that one represents the embodiment of fear. And with fear, what you have is the lower frequency curriculum. So the key features in the lower timeline are ones that are ruled by the main expression of fear, which is control and division. Control, division, and fear are all representative of unconsciousness. So what this really boils down to is two timelines, and the timeline split is between consciousness and love and fear and unconsciousness. With these two timelines, we have the option to always transition and always choose to embody more consciousness and to embody more awareness and therefore unity and therefore love. And that is what this time period is teaching us. We are in the middle of this timeline split where these two realms of the third dimensional Earth and the fifth dimensional Earth are still interacting with one another, and they will continue to interact and to engage with one another and to even look like they are coexisting inside the same realm. When in reality, we are at a massive choice point. We are in two worlds at once, and we cannot tell the difference because we are not at that full timeline split yet. We are in different realms of Earth. And within these different realms, now we have our own personal curriculum. And within our own personal curriculum, it is looking as though that we are on one solid Earth with all other people who are on the same exact timeline. When in reality, we are pulling all of our vibrational momentum in one direction, which is love and consciousness, which is represented by the fifth dimensional timeline. As we are at the very same time experiencing the world around us, pulling its consciousness deeper into division, deeper into separation and unconsciousness. When these two worlds fully pull into their own vibrational realms, that is when we will see the completion of this timeline split and it won't even be in front of our very eyes because the universe has brilliant editing software. All we will see with our physical eyes is the continuous strip of film, the movie of Earth, go into different plots and go into different storylines where all of a sudden we drift further apart from our environment, further apart from the people who are no longer a frequency matched to us, further apart from a collective that is no longer a frequency matched to us. There will be different storylines as to why this occurred, but we won't actually see the split. Instead, we will see the journey of the choices we made. And the really cool thing is, the more you use your free will to make radical changes and empowered choices, your free will becomes a conduit to the higher order of this universe, the fifth dimensional timeline. And the higher order of this universe is expressed as synchronicity, which aligns things to make it look like it was fate all along.
Good morning, folks. We've got an earthquake, a new James Webb shot of the outer reach of the galaxy, and a key study that falls in line with something we've been heavily discussing for the last year and a half. Let's start with space weather. In the last 24 hours on our star. It was a very quiet day. No significant solar flares or CME eruptions. Of course, we're awaiting CME impact from the X-class flare 2 days ago. Forecast to impact at some point today. In addition to continuing to watch for more eruptions from the southern sunspots, there are new sunspots getting ready to crest over the limb into view. We'll have eyes open here for flaring activity as they turn in to face the Earth. What we're waiting for today is the CME that was the focus of the last two morning shows. The partial halo eruption is moderately dense and very fast. NOAA forecasts level 3 geomagnetic storms when it impacts. We'll have eyes on the solar wind today. Big earthquake occurred yesterday afternoon, 6.5 off the west coast of Canada. These are rarer events at this location, but certainly not unheard of. Luckily, it was far enough offshore that there isn't much to report in terms of its effects. Bit of eye candy up next from James Webb as it scopes star formation clusters in the far outer reach of the galaxy. The brightest and most dense cluster in this image is a group of baby stars, and you can even see some of their polar jets extending out away from the small group. Link to this image is found below, and also is a link to our top science article of the day. Folks, the story we've been driving home again and again since the middle of last year is how unusual the solar storm effects have been, despite the space weather that caused them being moderately powerful at best. This one hits a mid-level solar storm, which produced significant auroral activity and energetic particle penetration into the atmosphere that is usually reserved for very intense solar storms. Once again, this is because Earth's magnetic poles are shifting, the Earth is becoming more vulnerable, and less from the Sun is able to do more and more to Earth in this ongoing geomagnetic excursion.
Last night, all this took place down in Central America, right off the coast of Guatemala and El Salvador, and this here matters also what struck up in Alaska preceding this event here off the west coast. These two sets of earthquakes struck first. They matter because the new earthquake, the new big earthquake, struck at the halfway point between the two. If you look, you almost have to look a world away to see it. But this is a wave that's going from Alaska all the way down to Central America and back. And that wave is contained in something. Let me show you. So this is the USGS plate boundary map for the Pacific and all the other plates. The red lines define the areas between plates. Now, I just told you about an earthquake up here in Alaska and all the way down here at Central America. Look what's right there at Central America, at Guatemala, El Salvador, where the other earthquakes are striking that preceded this, came before this 6 off the coast of Vancouver. So up here and down here. Well, those are both sets of the plate boundaries on either side. That's smack in the middle. If you go up and around the bend of the plate, this is the halfway point between here and here. If we were to straighten this out into a straight line, again, we would be talking about the Juan de Fuca fracture zone being the middle point between the Alaska quake and now middle point of what? Middle point of a giant wave that's spreading out and being contained in the plate boundaries. It's dropping off the earthquakes along the way as the wave spreads. in many areas you'll see equidistant spacing on the earthquakes, or very close to equidistant spacing. As the wave spreads across areas, it drops off the quakes along the way, equidistantly spaced, as this VLF, very low frequency, ultra low frequency wave in the plate is spreading through these boundaries. Okay, now that you understand that, we're going to watch downstream, if you want to call it that. I will turn on a graphic here really quick that should help you a little bit. The craton diagram graphic, I've shown this for many years, and you see the big black arrows on there telling us where to watch. You see where the northwest arrow points. It points from the northwest to up right where the 6.5 is, and it points right down into where? Into Yellowstone. But in between there, you'll see on our map here, we have two sets of arrows. We also have to watch down the coast, down into California. So keep in mind this craton diagram, because we're going to be talking about the craton edge and what to look for upon it. We're going to see activity go over to Colorado, down through Texas, over to the New Madrid seismic zone, and even up the east coast of the United States. Should all see a significant increase in seismic activity over the next few days, going over the next 7 days. So let's start on the west coast. Let me get the craton diagram turned off. And over on the west coast, now that a 6.5 is struck up here, we have a stepping stone path of 5s leading out of the West Pacific over to here. Down into California we go. Let's look at our smaller earthquakes. This is going to help us to determine the area to watch in California. Now, I've already kind of predetermined where I'm going to be issuing the warning by looking, but I'll just tell you my reasoning on this. We have a giant wave coming in now equal to 6.5. It's contained on this red line here, and it's going into here. The wave is going to go two ways. One, over to the edge of the craton that I just showed you. That brings us over into Idaho and Yellowstone. The wave is also going to be going down through the Juan de Fuca and coming in on the coast of California. And it will drop off earthquakes each spot. So both spots are about to get hit. But what are we talking about? We're talking about more like 5.0 level activity over by Yellowstone, and something more like 6 to 6.5 from Bay Area to the north. Most likely, I'm going to look from Bay Area, that's San Francisco, north all the way to Eureka. It's a long stretch. It's about 200-mile stretch. Additionally, since we're warning the Bay Area to the north 200 miles, we actually have to watch to the south the same distance. And this puts the creeping section into the San Andreas into the mix, going from the Juan de Fuca out here off the coast, going down to the east by southeast. And California right here is where I'm going to watch. Let me take you back in time to 2018. So in 2018, and again a year later, but you guys remember the big Ridgecrest earthquake, right? Was that 2018? I think it's 2018. Maybe it was 2019. I'm pretty sure it was 2018. Anyway, out here in Southern California, we had a 7-point-something earthquake that struck here. I issued a forecast for it the day and a half, almost 2 days, 48 hours, before the 7 struck in Ridgecrest, which was the biggest earthquake in California in 20 years. A day and a half before, there was a 6-point-something earthquake right up here. Same spot, or relatively the same spot. Up here to the north, on the north side of the Juan de Fuca, there was a 6-point-something earthquake, prompting me to issue the warning for California to be on watch at the Bay Area for a similar-sized or greater earthquake to strike up to 7.0. The next day, or 36 hours, 48, 2 days later, basically, the 7 hit. It was a bigger earthquake. It hit down into California, but it hit down in Ridgecrest instead of the Bay Area. Again, I warned Bay Area to the Central Valley, and instead it hit the South Valley to Ridgecrest. That was a couple years ago, a few years back, when the 6 struck up here previously. So we're looking at this again, but this time I'm warning here at the Bay Area to the north, and we're going to watch for the same-sized earthquake, 6.5. So why am I not warning for less? Why am I not warning for more? Well, we have a solar event that's taking place right now. It's going to be arriving today on the 16th, sometime today. The Enlil solar model shows the ejecta from the sun, or whatever you want to call it, charged particles. Let's look it up. Enlil, NASA SWA. And it should show us the current projection for the arrival of whatever it is that's coming off the sun. You'll see it here on the right, this spike. Right before it, you'll see the ejecta. And Earth is the green dot in the middle. This is 2 ways of viewing it. One's a side profile, one's looking down from above on Earth, one's looking at the side profile of Earth. Earth is the green dot in the middle, and the ejecta, or whatever you want to call it, charged particles, due to arrive. Look at the time. There it is. Now, when we get an arrival of charged particles, those go and get captured in the Earth's magnetosphere and ionosphere. You get the northern lights, the air glow that happens starting at the North Pole and going down sometimes as far as the United States, southern states, depending on how powerful of a charged storm is arriving. Same for the southern hemisphere. You get the southern lights, and they come up as far as New Zealand and Australia. You'll see them. So that might happen, most likely will, in the next few days or less, as the arrival of the solar storm happens. Now, when the solar storm arrives, you get the air glow, you get the beautiful northern lights. That's all electricity. And that doesn't just zap off out into space. That actually gets taken down into the ground, into the core of the Earth. So within a few days of the arrival of the solar storm, the charged particles convert to electricity. They already are, but captured in the Earth's magnetosphere, it goes down to the core of the Earth. Comes back up as new deep earthquakes and major earthquake activity within a few days of the arrival of the solar storm. So the whole thing takes about a week. From the point where the solar storm happens, takes about 2 days to get here, and then another couple days you get the air glow, and another day of going to ground. All of a sudden you're at about 5 to 6 days already from the point of the solar storm. Then the earthquakes start. So tomorrow, today, 16th, arrival of the solar storm. I've got a forecast going now, which is going to have to incorporate in the increase that's going to take place, and I don't have that yet because it hasn't arrived yet. So I'm going to forecast for the same sized earthquake to strike down here in California. The energy should be maintained over the next few days. Will it increase? We'll have to wait to see what the solar storm is, how big it is, how far down the northern lights come, how long it goes on, and so forth. But right now, I'm going to issue the warning for a 6.5, up to 6.5, to strike Bay Area, which is San Francisco, to the north to Eureka. We have to warn everybody, though, as far south as the Central Valley, and really everybody in California needs to be aware of this, because anytime we start talking about 6.5 plus, can cause damage. There can be people traveling from Southern California to Northern California that need to know, and then Southern California is not going to escape this. We'll see a 5, most likely by the end of the week, strike down here east by southeast of LA. We already had a 5.3 in the South Valley. We had a swarm and 4.0 level activity in the LA basin. We have the cracks in the ground that have formed along the coastline there that everybody was talking about. And now we're going to see more like 5.0 level activity down at Salton Sea with a swarm. I would also expect a few hundred earthquakes to accompany that 5. So it would be a big stack of earthquakes plus something like a 5.
Good morning, folks. Today we're going to highlight an unusual earthquake, a cold snap in Australia that's breaking records, but the main coverage is of the level 4 solar storms we had overnight. It was another instance of the sun giving more than expected. But let's start with the last 24 hours on our star. It was mostly quiet, smaller flares only, no significant CMEs. We still have the sunspots to monitor, but for now, they have all quieted down considerably. We'll certainly have eyes on them, but now let's go to what happened overnight. The CME we had been expecting arrived, and it was about 6 hours later, slightly slower and weaker than what NOAA was forecasting, and yet it exceeded all storm disruption expectations. Looking at the solar wind, we can see where that impact occurred yesterday evening. Moderate speed, moderate density, definitely below what was forecast for the shock wave, but the maximum storm condition forecast of KP7, a level 3 event, was exceeded anyway, despite the shockwave being weaker than expected. Aurora were expected, but not all the way down to Texas. And folks, simply put, as we've had to say a few dozen times this sunspot cycle, the sun is able to do more and more to Earth with less and less because the magnetic field of our planet is weakening in this ongoing magnetic pole shift, leaving our planet more and more vulnerable as time goes on. Quick look at seismicity, where the most interesting quake of the last day wasn't even close to the biggest on Earth during that time. 5.1 in Texas is pretty unusual to say the least. Lastly, on the science notes, a cold snap in South Australia is breaking a lot of records. Several areas haven't seen spring days this cold in 20 to 40 years. Several others have never seen a spring day that cold.
Legend tells that as one comes closer to the entrance of Shambhalla, the vaguer their thoughts become. because the aura of the city itself begins to infiltrate the mind, an aura so spiritually potent and physically complex, it cannot be explained by mortal means of communication. Nicholas was apparently being communicated to, though, by a very powerful being. In his paintings, he began obsessively depicting a figure he believed to be the messianic ruler of Shambhalla. In fact, otherworldly communication is supposedly how the Rourkes came to search for Shambhalla in the first place. But it was not Nicholas. Several years prior, from their home in New York, Helena Rourke was struck by telepathic instructions from an entity known as Master Moria. The Rourkes were, by all means, exceptionally gifted mystics who exhibited convincing abilities to channel and communicate with the spiritual realm, among other supernatural powers such as premonition and healing. In particular, Helena's telepathic instruction from Master Moria was enough that they both became absolutely convinced of the literal existence of Shambhalla. Why else, at the height of their extremely successful careers, would they choose to embark on an exceedingly dangerous, multi-year journey than to search for something they legitimately believed existed? One of the final events recorded in Nicholas's diary was a description of a flying craft, which 7 members of their crew witnessed. This sighting is notable because it occurred 24 years before UFOs became of public interest. In his own words,
"On August 5th, something remarkable. We were in our camp in the Kukunar district, not far from the Humboldt chain. In the morning, about 9:30, some of our caravanners noticed a remarkably big black eagle flying above us. 7 of us began to watch this unusual bird. At this same moment, another of our caravanners remarked, 'There's something far above the bird,' and he shouted in his astonishment. We all saw, in a direction from north to south, something big and shiny reflecting the sun, like a huge oval moving at great speed. Crossing our camp, this thing changed in its direction from south to southwest, and we saw how it disappeared into the intense blue sky. We even had time to take out our field glasses and saw quite distinctly an oval form with a shiny surface, one side of which was brilliant from the sun."
It was after this event that the Rourkes and their entire crew seemingly disappeared from the face of the Earth, despite being closely monitored by Soviet, American, and British intelligence. Communications ended, and the world considered the Rourkes dead. The only source we have for what occurred during this time is Nicholas's diary, which revealed that the last 5 months of their journey were spent in a Tibetan prison camp, where conditions were so brutal that 5 of their 6 crew members would not survive. However, this leaves more than 7 entire months of their invisible year completely unaccounted for. In 1928, they were released, and the Rourkes quietly returned home. One may quickly conclude that their expedition was a complete failure, but in retrospect, there are legitimate reasons to question whether they might have actually completed their mission as intended, and found the hidden city at some point during those 7 months. First, when Nicholas's diary was finally made public, there was a rather strange entry recorded in the remote valley of Umon, where an old monk led them to the back of a temple, where a large cave opening was blockaded by carefully cut stones. The monk stated that it was a holy entrance to the inner earth kingdom of Shambhalla, and forbid them from entering. Secondly, their American sponsors were apparently so pleased with the results of their journey, one which seemingly failed, that the Rourkes were sent back to the Himalayas on a follow-up expedition from 1933 to 1935. The stated purpose of this mission was erosion plant studies in Central Asia, which modern academics agree was a cover for something else entirely. This mission was signed off by the US President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and funded by Henry A. Wallace, the Secretary of Agriculture and future Vice President, who called Nicholas Rourke his guru. This draws the first direct connection of the Rourkes to the FDR government. During this second expedition, again, they disappeared, this time for 3 months, in the middle of the Himalayan mountains with zero record of their activities. And again, their mission was considered a massive failure. But not so much a failure that President Roosevelt himself signed the Rourke Pact in 1935, marking their second direct connection to the FDR government.